Welcome to another episode of the LinguaBees podcast. Today we are joined by Dr. Alejandra Núñez Asomosa, who is a full-time associate professor, researcher at the language department at the University of Guanajuato in Mexico, where she lectures on discourse analysis, applied linguistics, and second languages program design. She teaches the BA in ELT program as well as the MA in applied linguistics in ELT. Dr. Núñez's academic background includes a PhD in linguistics by the Trinity College in Dublin, an MA in ELT by the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom, and a BA in TESOL by the University of Guanajuato in Mexico. Her research interests include linguistic repertoires, translanguaging, and transnationalism, through which she explores the construction of identities of transnational youth and returning migrants. As an active professor and researcher, Dr. Núñez is a member of the prestigious National Researcher System in Mexico. Her most recent studies address linguistic practices of young migrants in Mexico's North Center area, as well as decolonizing teaching practices as a tool to support younger generations of students in their formation as English teachers. Welcome, Dr. Alejandra, and thank you for being here with us today. We feel honored to have you.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, first of all, would like to know more about you. Could you tell us where you are from and how your interest in this profession began? What inspired you to become a researcher?
Well, I'm originally from North Mexico. I was raised there, and since I was very little, I had contact with English because it was a very important topic in my family. My dad always encouraged us to learn languages, particularly English. So that's how my interest in language began. And later, when it was time for me to choose a major in university, I was going for the sciences. But I had also a big passion for languages, and I had some mentors and teachers who recommended also exploring that area, and I ended up coming to Guanajuato to study the program in TESOL.
That's very interesting because your research interests mostly address migrants and transnationals. And for some, these two terms may be rather confusing. Could you tell us about the difference in meaning and what made you choose this line of research?
Sure. Well, the topic of migration in Mexico is something very widely spoken and very widely known. There's a big population of Mexican migrants in the US. And the term migrant is basically an umbrella term that covers different profiles of migrants. And within this term, we have, for example, returning migrants, circular migrants, transnational migrants. So in my case, I focus on transnational migrants, and this term refers to people who have very significant ties to different countries. They, of course, they migrated, but they somehow are suspended between two countries, between two systems. So they are always navigating this duality. They have contact with at least two languages, two educational systems. They might be living with part of the family in one country, but still have contact with another part of the family in another country. So there's this feeling of being suspended, and they might also have different profiles in terms of coming and going between these two countries for educational reasons. For example, there are some youths in Mexico that would experience going to school in the US for an academic year or a semester, and then they come back, and then they move back to the US. So there's this constant back and forth in their lives.
So that's very interesting what you're mentioning now because I can assume this is only my personal assumption, that the topic of bilingualism is also involved within these two topics of these two lines of research. Have you perhaps addressed this line of research as well, bilingualism?
Yeah, of course. There's a close connection between bilingualism and biculturality because when you speak of someone living in between two countries or being in this constant navigation of two systems, two cultural systems, language is always at the center. You have to communicate. For example, um, many young students or many young migrants learn English because they have the experience of living in the US, but they also have family, their grandparents or extended family living in Mexico. So they use Spanish on a regular basis to communicate with them, or they might also have Latino friends in their places where they live. So there's always this constant also going back and forth between languages. So bilingualism becomes a major issue in their lives and something that they also need to make sense of and navigate in their life trajectories.
Last year, you were invited by the US Embassy to give a talk regarding your work with young migrants and transnationals. Could you tell us about that experience?
Of course, yeah. Well, I was very happy to be invited to that talk because for me it's always very important to spread and to let people know about the research that is being done, and particularly in Guanajuato, that is also very widely known for having a large population of migrants and being in the US. I think it's very important for people to get to know these kinds of phenomena, what happens with young people migrating, what are the issues that they face, their different profiles, and to sort of shed light on the issues that they navigate. So this talk basically was an opportunity to let people know a little bit more about the history of Mexico and the US in terms of migration, the complex relationship that there is between these two countries because of the vicinity, the history, the types of migration, the different regions of migration that we have in Mexico, and then going to the particular stories of young people who, for many reasons, have had to migrate to the US. And as I was saying, they have different profiles, different experiences and trajectories. And I wanted to visualize the things they go through, particularly in terms of language use. Because what happens is that many times we think that in Mexico, there's no one that speaks English or that no one knows English. But there is a very large population of migrants, returnees, or transnationals who are bilingual and who speak in English on a regular basis in Mexico. And many times we don't know about them and their lives. So I basically presented information on the different discursive practices of these transnational students or bilingual speakers that we have in this case in Guanajuato, in Zacatecas, in the area of central Mexico. So that was the talk about, we talked about phenomena such as biculturality, bilingualism, and it was very well received by the audience. They had a lot of questions. Many of them didn't realize how important it was to visualize and to pay attention to those young people who are bilingual in this area of Mexico and in many other areas.
Right. I was going to ask about the reaction that you got from the audience because we're talking about the U.S. Embassy here in Guanajuato, right? And it is fair to say that this talk happened during the Cervantino Festival here in Guanajuato, very popular for being an international festival of arts and culture and this and that. And last year, the United States was the guest country to participate in the festival. So did you have, the audience was largely Americans or was it mostly like a combination of US citizens and Mexicans, or how was the audience?
It was mostly Mexicans. We had some tourists, some local people, And it was very interesting to see how they perceive the topic. Like there was a small room, but it was filled with people, and they were really, really interested. As I was saying, they asked a lot of questions, and it was also very interesting for me to see how the space was organized. This talk took place in one of the rooms where they had an exhibition on the importance of migrants in the US. So it was a very nice context to give the talk in. We were surrounded by pictures of migrants, particularly women. There was a whole wall dedicated to women migrants and the hard work they do.
Wow.
So it was also very powerful to be talking about these issues in that space.
I bet. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just hearing about it. It's so exciting as well. So congratulations about being invited to give that talk. More recently, you were a presenter at AAAL, the American Association for Applied Linguistics. It was an event held in Houston, Texas, where you shared one of of your most recent projects about linguistic repertoires. What is a linguistic repertoire, first of all, and how does it differ from knowing different languages?
Well, linguistic repertoire is a term that has gained a lot of relevance in recent years. It's not new. It's a concept coined by Brigitte Busch. She's a researcher from Austria, and she conceives a linguistic repertoire as a toolbox. So basically, we have different resources, different tools within our knowledge. And all of these tools we gain and we incorporate to ourselves, basically, depending on the different experiences that we have, the places where we've lived, has to do with our family, and it's about all the communicative resources that we have, not necessarily languages as we know them, as English, Spanish, or like separate entities, but it has to do with any tool, any element that would allow us to communicate. So it could be, for example, our knowledge about emojis, our knowledge about alphabets, different codes, as I was saying, different experiences, the level of education that we have, everything that we learn throughout life allows us to configure our repertoires and the ways in which we are able to communicate in different contexts with different people.
And this body language can also be part of that, right? Because we have like sign language, for example, that, well, it's a language, right? And it could be considered also part of like a linguistic repertoire, whether you need to use sign language or not. I mean, it is also through signs. I'm thinking about Italian culture, for example, and Italian language. They have a lot of signs that represent something, that they have a meaning, and people understand these within the context. But outside that context, then that is a different story, right? So it's inspiring to me that you share with us this project, the one that you're working on at the moment, of linguistic repertoire. So how did this project start, and what is it basically about?
Well, it was very important for me when I started knowing and learning about this concept of linguistic repertoire to become very aware of something that we are not normally aware of, and that is the way we communicate. We go through life speaking and communicating with people because that's what we do. This is something natural to all humans. We have different ways of communicating and connecting with people, and we just do it basically automatically. We don't necessarily think about it all the time. But if you think about it, every time you talk to someone, every time you write a post, you go into social media, or you have some kind of interaction, or you're in a context where communication is needed, we need to accommodate our language and the way we communicate in that particular context. We can use different dialects, different varieties, different elements to allow that communication to happen. So at the time where this idea started, I was working for the university, the Autonomous University in Zacatecas, at the state university, public university. And with one of my colleagues there, we started thinking about how we could capture all the diversity and the different ways of communicating that our students in the university had, because we were noticing that many of them were mixing Spanish with English, for example, or they would write or use different languages when they were interacting in social media. So we wanted to learn more about that, and so the project began in Zacatecas back in 2021. And we invited students from the university, but also general public to join the project. We created a website where we could set up all the instruments for the research. We had a consent form. We had some small pieces of text where they could read more about the terms we were using, such as linguistic repertoire, what did it mean to be bilingual, discursive practices. And so we opened the invitation to anyone who wanted to participate, and we were lucky to have 31 participants in total who were willing to share about the different languages they spoke, the places or the context where they spoke them, about their families, the different dynamics that went about communication inside their families. And it was really, really enriching and surprising to see what they had to say about that.
So intriguing. So it started in Zacatecas, but I've heard that you're also extending this line of research in Guanajuato as well. So how many participants have you got for this?
Right. So after we started with the project in Zacatecas, I moved to Guanajuato and I started working in the university here. And so I wanted to continue with this project. I basically had the same methodology. It was based on the first project that we had in Zacatecas. But in Guanajuato, we had less participants. It was about 10 participants.
Okay.
It was only open to university students. Since I was new to the context, I wanted to start at a small scale. And so the invitation was only open to university students, particularly in the language department. And we got 10 participants. Something that was similar in both cases was the age range. In Zacatecas, we started, or we had participants that went between 18 to 46 years old, and then in Guanajuato we had between 20 and 46. So it was pretty much similar.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So here about this topic, I consider it as a very relevant topic as well. I see people on social media getting creative with languages, for example, usually combining English with Spanish, as you mentioned, in Mexico's context, but also the use of emojis that you were using as well. And beyond emojis, now we have GIFs and we have songs, we have also stickers, and stickers have become, in my personal opinion, the new version of emojis and the new version of expression in like texting, like. And have there been any shocking findings that relate to this, or any that was any shocking findings in general? If so, could you share a couple of examples with us?
Well, we had a lot of really interesting findings. It was really exciting to see how creative young people are with languages and how open they are to diversity and to mixing not only languages but different elements. As you were saying, it is more and more common nowadays to have really complex pieces of text understood as anything like oral communications, written communication. So they get really creative with mixing all of these elements. When we asked our participants to describe, for example, the dynamics inside their family, something that was really shocking to find was the level of discrimination that they experienced inside their families. While many families are open to young people learning languages and being able to communicate with different people, there's also this tendency to punish the mixing of languages or the incorporation of other languages with Spanish and challenging the purity of the language. So there are still these ideologies that language should be something pure, something stable, something that has to be correct all the time. And so these young generations, we see how they challenge those ideologies, those beliefs, and how creative they are to navigate those ideologies and to accommodate to the different contexts, particularly virtual contexts where they interact. So that was something really shocking. And something else that I asked the participants in this research was about the incorporation of other varieties of Spanish. Because yes, we know, particularly in Mexico, there's a lot of mixing between English and Spanish, and in social media we see it all the time with other languages as well, because English is an internationally used language, and it's the go-for language in terms of international communication. But I wanted to also find out about other varieties. For example, when we hear urban music, such as reggaeton, we see the mixing of Colombian Spanish, Puerto Rican Spanish, Mexican Spanish, and I wanted to see if students were aware of that and incorporating those varieties. And surprisingly enough, they said they wouldn't feel as comfortable, or it wouldn't come as natural for them to mix other varieties of Spanish with their Mexican Spanish. So that was also really surprising, because the input they get from content on media reflects that, but in reality, they manifested not feeling very comfortable with it.
And do you feel that this kind of finding or response by participants was in a way like truthful? Because I mean, using reggaeton and like, culturally speaking, in Mexico, for example, reggaeton is so strong within the society in general. And maybe it's just me, but it's a little bit difficult to believe that there isn't an influence per se. Maybe they were feeling like, no, like this negative feeling about, no, I am true to Mexican Spanish or something like this, and that might have influenced the way that they responded to this question. But as minimum as the use is of any word or any expression, or even like imitating the pronunciation, does that also consider as a linguistic repertoire being used by people in general?
Yes, it would definitely be part of their linguistic repertoire. And it was interesting because in the questionnaire that we sent them and that they answered, they were aware, they showed awareness of these other varieties of Spanish being present.
Right.
But when we spoke in the interviews, that's when they explained not feeling comfortable or feeling a little bit distant to those varieties.
I see.
Which was very surprising. But again, because we had a very small sample of participants, it would be very difficult to generalize the findings, and I would love to continue digging in and trying to find out more about it. Because what I see in social media, particularly in videos on YouTube, for example, or Instagram, sort of gives me the impression that there is something else going on there. There's more to find out about. So I would definitely would like to continue exploring this issue.
Which is also the beauty of research in general, because the findings of a particular context are only truthful for this particular context, as you mentioned, and it's impossible to generalize what for everyone, like for the entire Mexican society in this case. So it would be definitely interesting and also exciting. I can see that you also feel excited about this topic and continuing this line of research. In general, for this sample in Guanajuato, how many languages do the participants speak on an average? Do they mention any information about this?
Yeah, we asked them about that. In the case of Guanajuato, they mostly speak Spanish. That was the first language they spoke, followed by English. Then we also had Japanese, that was the third most spoken language, and then followed by other European languages and Mexican Sign Language. In the case of Zacatecas, it was a little bit different. We had first English, French, Italian, German and also Mexican Sign Language. So
Wow.
we see also the influence of Asian languages in the case of Guanajuato, which is kind of expected because there's a lot of Asian companies arriving to the state of Guanajuato, and so there's more contact with Koreans or Japanese people. So I can see where that finding comes from.
Right. It's interesting that the second here, apart from English, is Japanese, and in Zacatecas, French. I would be interested to finding out as to why,
Exactly.
why this difference, you know, because it's within the same country, but in between each state it's very different. The third language that is the chosen one as to continue, right? Like the language linguistic studies. In this case, do you think language shapes people's identity?
Of course. Language is closely related to identity. Actually, there is a phrase that I love, a quote that I love by Gloria Anzaldúa, who is one of my favorite academics. And I use a lot of her theory and her concepts in my research. And this quote is, "I am my language." Gloria Anzaldúa says that. And I think this quote carries a lot of meaning, because if you think about it, I am my language. Yo soy mi lengua. It's something that you live, that you experience, something that is related to your body, to your family, to the places that you go to, and your trajectory in life, basically. So all of that shapes your identity, and also your identity is always going to shape the way in which you use language. The silences, the experiences, the violence that you go through in life, all the positive, negative experiences that we have, our interactions with people, always make an impact in the way we perceive ourselves, in the way we feel about ourselves, and in the way we talk about it, and in the way we show it. Something else that was interesting, for example, coming from the research, was the fact that students mentioned that they would go, or they would use resources from different languages to express emotions. And I think this is closely related again to identity, to the psychological manifestation of their selves. So that is why we can never study language without thinking about identity. These are elements that are closely linked.
I was reading about the linguistic repertoires as well, and how it is, as you mentioned, strongly linked with identity. And I was wondering, now that you're mentioning that students mention that they use different languages to express emotions. Do you think this has an impact on how they communicate in Spanish as well? Like, for example, not finding the words to express what they feel, or if in this quote that you're mentioning, "I am my language," what does that mean? You know, like if they cannot express their emotions with their first language, in this case Spanish, and they use other languages to do that. So where does my language stay in general in that case, because it's more than one language, and perhaps it's not my language, or have I appropriated that language within my identity or my persona? So what would be your opinion on this?
Well, I love that you asked that question, because also when I was talking with participants, in this case, this was a research I did for my PhD. One of the participants mentioned a phrase, and then he explained why he mentioned that. And that's actually the quote that I put in the title for my dissertation. He said that we create our language. So I think this is closely related to this idea of my language, and how we perceive the way we embody language. A big part of the linguistic repertoire concept is, again, creativity, and how we relate emotions, language, experiences, everything that happens to us And sometimes we don't have the words to express something that happened, something that we feel. In this case, this participant that I mentioned, he said that sometimes when he was with his girlfriend, he wanted to express how much he loved her and how much he was feeling for her, but he couldn't find the words. And because his girlfriend was also a multilingual person, they found ways to create their own words and their own expressions to tell each other how much they love each other or how they were feeling about each other. And I think that's really interesting because it demonstrates in practice how you actually take those tools and those elements from your repertoire to create something new and to allow you to navigate or express something that otherwise you wouldn't know how to do or would keep you silent. So I think that linguistic repertoires also are a very important element to empower people to become more creative and to actually use language for the purpose of actually expressing their identity at different points in their lives.
Right. So, what would you say are the advantages or disadvantages of exploring linguistic repertoires and knowing more about this topic?
Well, something that I would consider an advantage is that we know more about identity. When you get people thinking and becoming more aware about their use of language and how they navigate the world through language, they also find out more about themselves. They become aware of the experiences, they can resignify certain experiences that they have had. They become aware of the complexities of their lives and how sometimes it's not enough to know only one language or one variety to express or to learn. If you're studying, for example, you're majoring in an area university and you see that you need to get more knowledge about something, but resources in Spanish are limited, maybe you can go for English or French, or you can find ways to keep learning and find out more information about something. So it really makes you aware of all the power that you have, also the creativity that you have. So it's also a journey about learning about yourself.
About yourself and about the world in general as well, right? Because I remember just now that the what is it? The dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, I think, in UK, just added. Well, this happened a couple of years ago. Added a lot of words from different languages, but in particular in Korean language, from Korean language into the English dictionary. So it's like it's not a combination of English and Korean, but taking the Korean word as it is pronounced, and that's the way that they write it into the English language in this case. And they included it in the dictionary, which is very interesting on how not only creating new versions of language or taking inspiration from different areas, but also how we take some words that have become frequently used by people in general around the world, that there is a need to include these into a dictionary and to give them a meaning in English, in other languages in this case. So is that also related to the use of these linguistic repertoires?
Of course, yeah, definitely. And this example that you're providing is actually a very good example of this creativity that is involved in using resources in repertoires. So you're sort of taking a word, but also writing it in a different languages. So it's a process of creativity. And you're also sort of honoring another language. You're also kind of winking, to other communities, other speakers, showing them that what they say is meaningful and that it matters and it should be sort of officialized in the use of a dictionary, but not necessarily. We could also honor that in our daily use of languages and incorporating other people's ideas and cultures and experiences.
Right. And within that creativity, I was also thinking about Mexicans, for example, when they try to explain the meaning of a word, but not only the meaning, but the feeling of a word, right? For example, the most common example that I can think of is when Mexican people are cursing, for example, and using cuss words. And and they mention, for some of my friends mention, it doesn't feel the same to cuss in English than to cuss in Spanish. And they have to explain this feeling to other people that are not knowledgeable in Spanish or in Mexican culture, for them to know what exactly means and how exactly it feels to say this cuss word in a particular situation. And maybe you're not trying to be rude, but you use this word to express that very strong feeling. And I was just thinking about this within the creativity that you're mentioning as well. What Mexicans have to go through to explain or have their feelings come across to other users of other languages. And that's why also I feel like a lot of people, a lot of foreigners and tourists here in Mexico feel so interested in learning Spanish as well and Mexican culture because of this richness in the feeling that you mentioned that that language has, and that we're usually described as passionate.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. And now that you're mentioning this issue about feelings or this experience of feelings language, this also reminds me of the initial work that Rita Bush did with linguistic repertoires, which was giving children, multilingual children, um, an image of a human body, and they could color the different places in the body where they felt their language, or you know how to represent the feeling of language in the body.
Right.
And it's really interesting to look at those portraits. She called them language portraits, sorry. And you can see that. And then when children explain, well, I put English in my feet because it allows me to, I don't know, navigate the world or to go places. I put French in my heart because it relates to my family. So you could also get to see how they make those emotional connections between
Right.
languages and people and places, and it's really interesting.
Definitely. I'm seeing like a lot of connections within other lines of research as well, like psychology and in linguistics, we could the mixture of that, the psycholinguistic, the social linguistic aspect of this combination of repertoires that you're mentioning as well. But tell us, Dr. Alejandra, has this study been published yet, or are you in the works, or where can the audience grab a copy of this study?
Well, we have some information that relates to the findings that we had in Zacatecas in the website. The website is called multilinguistisac.edu.ms. I will share with you the website so you can share it with the audience later. We have some information there. We have a paper that is actually in revision at the moment. That one is about the results we had in Zacatecas. And there's another paper that I'm writing with a group of colleagues about the project in Guanajuato. So that one will still take a little bit more time to get published, but hopefully the first one will be published this year.
Okay. Well, we hope as well, because it's very interesting when you're sharing with us. And to have the discussion also gives the space to feel curious about the findings that you will share about Guanajuato's context, but also about the topic in general, right? So I hope that the audience also feels inspired about this topic and to know a little bit more as I do. So before ending today's episode, is there any word of advice you would like to share to future researchers in the field of applied linguistics, or maybe someone who might be interested in also getting into research linguistic repertoires?
Well, a few days ago, I was invited to give a very little speech to our students in a research seminar. And I was telling them that sometimes doing research can feel like you're going through a dark tunnel with, no ending, and you don't know when you're going to come out of that tunnel. It could be very isolating and quite hard to walk through that tunnel. But I think that what gives you the strength and what keeps you going is, as you were mentioning, curiosity. If you're curious, not only about your topic, but about, for example, tools you can use to make your life easier as a researcher, programs, content, other researchers, books, anything that you can be curious about and that would lead you into different directions is going to give you a lot of information, is going to keep you motivated to walk through that tunnel and to actually do things. So I think my number one advice is always be curious, question everything, and also be aware that research will never happen the way you think about it or the way you plan it. Be prepared for surprises, be prepared for changes. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to do it, and you have to go through the experience in order to have a product. Particularly doing research in Mexico could feel a little bit daunting sometimes because there's a lack of resources, a lack of support. But if you're curious and you try to find ways to use your creativity to help you in that process as well, I think you will be able to do it. And something else that I think is very important, because many times we just focus on the process of actually doing a research project and getting a product done. That is one part, but it's also very important to share your findings, to share what you learned in the process with other researchers and particularly with the general public. It's very important that citizens, people, your friends, your family, people in your community know about what you're researching, what other people are researching in the world, so they can also get they can also learn something new, and they can also become part of studies or research, or they could talk about and have conversations about the issues that are being researched.
Right, well, that's very inspiring, not only for new researchers or new students that might join the MA in Applied Linguistics in ELT at the Universidad of Guanajuato, but also for those who are in the middle of that tunnel, as you mentioned, or about to get out of that tunnel as well. It reinforces this kind of inspiration or source of motivation that we need, right, to go that extra mile and to actually get ourselves out of that tunnel with a very good product as well. So thank you very much for your words and for such a pleasant conversation, Doctora, really, and for sharing your current project about linguistic repertoires. It was a delight having you as a guest.
Thank you so much, Ali, for your time and for allowing me to share this with the audience of Linguavis.
Thank you so much.